I'm going to show you how to do a basic merge in Power Query. I have a list of part numbers, their category and their part description. This file is our parts master data. If I scroll down here, you'll see there's electronic components, electrical supplies, there's also hardware, consumer electronics and IT products. If I just click on the filter here, you can see all the categories there. In a separate file, I have a vendor's master data list. So there's a tab here for each vendor and the part numbers that they supply. I've made it so these last two here actually supply the electronic components. So there's two vendors for the same products here. There are also some parts in the part master data that aren't mentioned in any of these tabs. There are some parts that don't actually have a vendor. It's just so I can show you different scenarios on how you can clean up the data as well when you're in Power Query. I do have other videos on Power Query, though this one is mainly based on how to do a basic merge. For example, we have these part numbers here for this vendor, and those part numbers will be listed in the part data. So we could, using formulas, if you look at my XLOOKUP video, put in the category and the part description against these part numbers here in our vendor list, or vice versa. We could, in our part data, pull in the vendor names here. But in this example, we're going to do it in Power Query. You might want to watch a few Power Query videos to decide whether you're going to use a formula or bring it into Power Query. If I'm just doing a few simple things or it's a one-off, I'm more likely to use formulas. If it's an ongoing report, I'm rerunning the report or refreshing the report, doing the same things every so often, then I'm more likely to do in Power Query. So in Power Query, you can do formatting transformations, you can do calculations and merge, append. Often when I'm doing a dashboard or sales reports and when I'm using pivot tables and charts, I'm probably going to have transformed my data in Power Query somehow to extract all the relevant information. It also depends on your system. If when you download reports from your system into Excel and it's in quite a good format, you might not need to use Power Query. But some systems, you might have lots of gaps like the vendor list here. You've got some blank rows, blank columns. Really, ideally, I'd like the vendor name against our part numbers, so it's more tabular data. I'm just going to go and show you how to do it in Power Query. There are various ways of getting your data into Power Query. If I'm just doing something quick, I'll go to my data tabs. All my Power Query options are here on the data tab. And I can go from table range, so I can get data from this table here. It doesn't necessarily need to be a proper table, as in when you press Ctrl-T to make this into a table. This isn't a table at the moment, it's just well-structured data. But if you just have your cursor in here and click from table range, Excel will recognise this range as a table. If you haven't got any gaps, it's structured well. And it does. I know there's 1,386 entries and there's an extra row there for the header. So I then normally press OK and get it into Power Query. But because this file here is my master data file, I don't actually want to amend this. What I'm going to do is open a new spreadsheet and use that as my separate report. So I'm actually going to close this parts and vendors, and I've got a blank workbook here. So I go back to my data tab. Rather than going from table range, I'm going to get data from file, and there's lots of various options here, but I'm going from file and then from Excel workbook. And then I find my file path and I choose my first file, part data, import, and click on this sheet here and it gives you a preview. You can just load it straight into Excel and have the data sat here. Obviously I want to transform the data, that's why I'm doing it in Power Query. So transform data, and here's my data here. When I make transformations to this, the steps are going to show here. So every time I do something, it's going to come up here. So if I just quickly go on here and transform format and make all this lowercase, you can see it's changed it all to lowercase and it's added the step there. It's going to remove that. There's already 3 steps here that Power Query is automatically done. The source is my file path here. The navigation is the sheets that I've chosen. There's only one sheet, part data. And it's got this change type. I actually am going to remove that. The change type is to do with this being text. If I go to the step before, it's actually got the text and the numbers because it's not sure. Then the change type step decides what it is, and it's decided they're all text, which is correct, but I just don't actually need that because I'm going to do something that's going to then automatically reapply it. So I'm going to delete that. These are my headers. Normally Power Query does recognise that and it promotes headers in one of its steps here, but it hasn't done it on this occasion. So I'm going to do that myself. On the Home tab, there's Use First Row as Headers, or if I click on this table here, it's also on my list here. So I can use either of those. So I just click that, and these are going to move up there. They're my headers. That's what I wanted. And normally Power Query does recognise that. So there's the promoted headers, and then it's reapplied the change type. It wouldn't have mattered if I left the change type in there, but I just don't want any unnecessary steps, especially if you're going to make a lot of transformations. This is going to be quite long and heavy. You want as few steps as possible. So I have my part data here. I now want my vendor lists here. So right click on the pane, new query, file, Excel workbook, and here's my vendors file. Import. It's good to name your sheets because I can easily see those are the ones I wanted. It could be that I had lots of tabs on that spreadsheet and only wanted the first 5, and then I wouldn't know if they were just called sheet 1 to up to 10 or something. I wouldn't know which ones they were. When you click on them, it does give you a preview though. But as I've named them, it's quite easy. I know I want all of these, so tick this box here, select multiple items, and then I can just choose all of those. And here they are here. I do actually need to clean these up a bit as well because it wasn't in a very good format to start with. And on this occasion, Power Query has promoted the headers, but they actually weren't the headers. This was part of the data, so I need to change that. I'm just going to make those amendments on one sheet just to show you a bit more on Power Query. There is the option here when I click on this Use First Row as Headers to use headers as first row. So it's going to then move these down. So I could click that, and that's more what I wanted. However, I've then got promoted headers, change type, demoted headers, change type. In actual fact, I could have just got rid of the promoted header step, and then that would have been what I wanted. If I go back to the navigation, before it promoted the headers, that was actually correct. So I can actually delete all of these. I don't actually need this column. All it has is the word vendor in it. There's nothing else in it. You just need to be familiar with the data first, just in case there might have been something further down that you did need. But I know that I don't want this. I can just highlight this column by clicking on it and press the delete key, or on the Home tab, there's remove columns. There's also this blank row here. I don't want any blank rows. Under remove rows, remove blank rows. And I can get rid of this column. If you're not sure, you might have multiple columns and you don't want to just go through and click in the ones that you don't want. They also might be in a different order. When you do different reports, there might be some blank columns. Rather than column 3 being the blank column, there might be another one. So rather than just clicking on column 3 and deleting it, just in case on a different report this is column 3, there isn't a remove blank columns option, but you can transpose your data. So transform, transpose. So now my columns are rows, and then I can go back and do my remove blank rows and then transpose it again. And then that's removes that blank column. That's just in instances where you're not sure which number columns, or it might be different each time, or there's multiple columns. So rather than going through and deleting them, you could transpose it because there is the remove blank rows option. And then just remember to transpose back. I'm just going to delete those though, because I'm just doing this as a one-off. I know that I can just safely remove this one here. So I just press delete. I don't want this null cell here. However, I can't just get rid of the row because I do want this. What you can do is just untick this to get rid of any null cells. However, I've now lost my vendor name. So I just delete that. What I want to do is have this against every part number. So I can actually highlight this on the Transform tab, fill down. And then I can either untick this to get rid of it, or if your report's always going to have the same layout, there is the option here under remove rows, remove top rows. And how many rows do you want to remove? Just the top one. And then I could make the same amendments to each of these and then append them so it's one long list. That's a little bit time consuming. So what I'm actually going to do in a second is undo these steps and then append them first, then make the same adjustments to all of them at once in one long list. But first of all, while I've got this nice list here where I've just got the vendor name and the part number, I'm going to actually name these columns. Vendor, it's for SKU for the part numbers. What I can do is actually pull in the category and the part description for any part number, any SKU that is found in this list. So a bit like an XLOOKUP. In Power Query, that's going to be a merge. So on the Home tab, Merge Queries, there is the option to merge as new. So rather than just bringing in the data here, I could then add another report here, which is a duplicate of this along with the part data. But I'm actually just going to add them in here for now because I'm going to delete it afterwards anyway. So merge queries, so it's going to be in this actual report here. I've got this Appliance United file here as my first table. I'll highlight the part numbers here because I'm going to find those in my part data. And it gives you the preview here. So these are the matching columns. It doesn't matter if the headers are the same or not. I'm just choosing the columns that I can match on. And here the selection matches 67 of 67, and that's what I wanted. So it's looking for all of these in here and it's found all of them. That's called a left outer join because this is my first table. So I want to base it on this. And it's found all of them in here, which is correct. Okay. So it hasn't pulled them in, it's just pulled in the table. I need to actually extract that data by clicking on these expand arrows here and then choosing which columns I want to bring in from that part data file. I don't want to bring in the SKUs because I already have them in this column here. So I can untick that, and I just untick that. That's just to do with the headers, and press OK. So now I've got my vendor name, my part number, the category and the part description. That's a very simple merge. I'm going to delete that for now and just show you another way of doing it, and then we'll do another merge after that. So rather than just clicking through all these red crosses here, I can actually click on the step that I want there. I just want it as it was at the beginning with the source navigation. So delete until end. I had already deleted that promoted header step on this one. I just need to quickly do that on the others, and then I'll append them so they then end up in one long list, and then I'll do the changes all in the one report. So here I'm just going to quickly remove those steps to bring these back down into the data. And again, they're my headers, I don't want them, so I can do it this way around, where I right click on the promoted headers, delete until end. So each of these files should just have the first two steps, so they're all the same format. So I can now append these. I've got 4 columns on each of them. They're all the same layout. So actually in this time I'm going to append, rather than just append queries. So if I did that, it would just add all these 4 files here underneath these here. I'm going to append as new. So we get an extra report here, and those will just stay as they are. I need to click this radio button, 3 or more tables, because there's 5 in total. So I already added this one here because I'm actually in this at the moment. And then I just need to click this one, hold Control down and click these others. Add. They're the ones I want to append into one report, all my vendor lists. Okay, so here we are. That looks like the very first one we had here. But if I just scroll a bit further down, we get to here. And they're all there. I can straight away just delete this column and this column here. I could also remove the blank rows, but not that one, just these blank ones. So there's a blank row after every vendor name. So remove blank rows. I want these to fill down. So they'll fill down until it hits another header. So this will fill down all of these nulls, and then here this will fill down until it reaches the next header here. So here on the transform, fill, down. And I'll just quickly scroll through to check that's correct. And I can then filter out the nulls. Just always be careful when you're filtering out information that there wasn't, if you've got lots of columns, there might have been something further along that you needed. So just double check before you filter stuff out that you haven't filtered out data that you actually needed. And I can name these. It's always best to name your headers and your files. When you add stuff here, I'm going to rename that as well, just so I remember what it is. And I can just rename this full vendor list. Okay, so I could either pull in the category and part description into this list, and I can quickly do that, won't take long. What I originally wanted to do was pull in the vendor name against these here, so against each of these part numbers. And remember to bear in mind the electronic components had more than one vendor, so we need to take that into account as well. But let's just do another quick merge here. So I could pull in the part descriptions. So let's just do a quick merge, home, merge queries, the SKU with the part data here. You can, and you sometimes need to, do your match based on more than one column. If you do that, you just need to make sure on both tables you do them in exactly the same order. If I click this and hold my control and click this, you'll see it's got a 1, 2. So I'd have to do, obviously it doesn't make sense in this occasion, but I'd have to do this and this, that's a 1, 2, if this vendor and category were the same. So just make sure if you are matching on more than one column, you do it in the same order. So let's do that again. SKU, part data, SKU, 1649 of 1649. So all of my part numbers here are found in our part master data. There was over 1,300 rows originally on my part data list, but remember, because I've appended the vendors, those electronic components are going to be duplicated, so there's going to be more rows. There are also some part data rows that don't have a vendor, but we'll look at that on the next part. So if I just expand here, don't need the SKU, we'll just bring in the category and the part description. You might then want to resort here. Might have wanted these in order and then these in order here. So the electronics direct has electronic components, and so does the electronics warehouse. So that was another simple merge. I'm just going to remove those for now. So right click on the merge section and delete until end. So we're just back to our vendor and part numbers. So let's go to our part data. This is where we want to pull in the vendor names. So if we go to merge queries, here are our part numbers, the SKU, and then we'll go to our full vendor list, and the SKUs there. So it's found 1,371 of the 1,386. Normally you would want it to find the full amount. This is because I deliberately didn't allocate all the part numbers to a vendor, just to show you the difference there. So let's just OK that, and then I expand, and I just remove the SKU because we already have them in this here, so we don't need that column. So if you're not sure why the numbers didn't match, you can then look here, and if I just load more, there's some nulls. So that'd be my difference. That's why it didn't find all of them. So I could deselect and just look at the nulls, and it should be the electronic suppliers. There were some there that I didn't allocate a vendor. So they're the ones that didn't bring in a vendor name, couldn't find them. So if you're not sure when you're doing the merge and then the numbers don't match, just go ahead and complete it, then look at the nulls. And then just remember to delete the filtered rows, so you're back to where you were. And what I can do on this vendor here, I could just, rather than have the word null, just to make it a bit more complete, transform, replace values, and I've just got this column highlighted, I just clicked on it. Find value null, replace with unknown vendor. So now we don't have any nulls. If I just load more, those electrical supplies, unknown vendor. So that's something I use quite a lot, replace values, replace one thing with another. So we've got our vendor names here. So you can see the electronic components, because there are two vendors, we've got two rows. There are over 1,300 rows to start with. If I go before the merge here, just click on one of the steps before the merge here, and I highlight the SKUs, I get these statistics here, these column statistics. It always previews only the first 1,000 rows. So I actually want to look at all of my data. So if I click down here, and I want it based on the full data set. So that tells me how many rows there are, 1,386. When I look at the bottom here, after I've done the merge, and I click on this again, 1,664, because for the electronic components, we're going to have two rows. You might not want it like that. It does actually mention here the distinct value, and that is the right number, 1,386. So it just depends how you want your data. This is correct because these aren't really duplicates, because you've got an entry for each vendor. The other way would be to pull both vendors into one cell. So you've just got the two listed here, and then you don't have this duplicate row here. So I'm just going to duplicate this so we can show you the other way of doing it. So if I just right click on this and duplicate, it should come up here at the bottom. I'm just going to rename this group by next to it, group by. So I can aggregate this data, a bit like when you have a pivot table, or you just want to sum ifs where you've got some data. Say you had some sales figures here, rather than having two lines, you just have this one line. These three are actually duplicates so far. It's only this that differentiates it. If this column had the sales figures in, you would then end up with one row and then those two figures added together. So that's what we're going to do. And then at the end, we're going to have to adjust that slightly. So let me just show you, because it probably doesn't make sense what I'm saying. On the Transform tab, go to Group By. You then pick your categories. The quicker way of doing it is before you press Group By, is to actually highlight the columns you're aggregating. So these three, Group By, and then they've automatically come up here. Then you can add grouping if you did forget something, or just delete one if you don't want it. So the part number, category, part description, I want to sum the vendor. There isn't a text option here. They're all numerical mathematical options. So I want to sum the vendor. I just leave the header as it is at the moment. Okay, so it's going to come up with an error, but I wanted Power Query to do the formula for me, to work this out rather than me having to write this from scratch. The sum isn't going to work on text, so I need to change this to text combine. If I start typing, it comes up here, text combine. And for text combine, I need to add a delimiter. So if I put a comma in here, and it tells me the syntax, text combine, text as list, that's the vendor, and the separator, I'm just going to add in a comma in quotation marks there. And then I can either put my cursor here and press enter, or there's this tick here. So now for that EC001, there's just this one line, and it just brings them next to each other. You can just amend this, just to make it look a bit cleaner, have a comma and a space as a delimiter if you prefer. It might look a bit cleaner. And then if I just do a quick filter just to check on my electronic components, there they are, they've got two vendors in there. And then when I click on here, I'm back to my 1,386 rows, because I've just got one for each. And again, you probably just need to sort it in some sort of order. So it just depends how you want to lay out your data. So I just wanted you to be aware that if there is more than one, if it finds more than one match, it is going to add a row to your data. And this is how you get around it. And also, again, depending on how you want your data laid out, you could split this and have this as vendor 1. And then on your transform, you've got the split column by delimiter. There is a comma option, but I actually had a comma and a space. Comma, space, and each occurrence. And this can be vendor, I'll rename it to vendor 2. So if we scroll down to electronic components, you then have them next to each other instead. But I'm just going to delete those actually. Let's just leave it as it was. Delete until end. You need these to match these. So if these, I'm just going to do the formatting here just to change it. So transform, format. If these were all in lowercase, they aren't going to match. So if I try and do the merge now, home, merge these SKUs with our full vendor list SKUs are in uppercase, you get 0 matches. So again, that might be a reason why some of them don't match. So before you do your merge, if you're not sure, you could just clean your data anyway. So on here, I could go to transform, format, uppercase, so it's all uppercase. And also I might want to trim it just in case there's some trading spaces anywhere. Trim, does no harm. And then on your full vendor list, although it looks okay, there's no harm in me just doing a format uppercase, just in case I've got thousands of rows. Maybe there are a couple there that are in lowercase, I don't know. And then trim as well. And then when you go back to your part data and do the merge again, home, merge queries, SKU, and the full vendor list SKU, it does the match. And again, there are just a few that didn't match because they didn't have a vendor. Okay. Expand these without the SKU, just get the vendor name. And this is the one where we've got one for each row. And let me just replace those nulls with unknown vendor. So that's a simple merge. I just bring it back to Excel just so you can see. I actually only really wanted to bring back the part data reports, these two here. You see here it says rows loaded. That's because it has loaded it back to Excel. So each of these, but I don't really need these. They're just still loading at the moment. I don't actually need these lists. So I can right click on these, load to, and rather than load to the table, load to only create a connection. Okay, then it gets rid of it. And you can do that for each of those. And then you can just delete those tabs. And then we just got 2 part data ones. Power Query does always format it in this way. So you can go to table design and just get rid of the formatting if you want. Or if we go to our load to, you can load it straight to a pivot table rather than then with your data here going to a pivot table by insert pivot table. You can actually load it directly from Power Query into a pivot table. And I'll just click those. And I'll do the same for this one as well, the group by. Right click, load to pivot table, okay, okay. And just do the same. I have separate videos on pivot tables. You might not want the category in here because the part number is indicative of the category. Also, what you could do instead is if I right click here, add a slicer. So you've got your categories as a slicer, as a sort of filter here. So if you have it like that, I think you then probably don't really need to have the actual category in your data. Because if I click electronic components, that's what shows up there. So this is the group by one where we've got the 2 vendors in one column here. And this one, let me do the same. Get rid of that category, but just right click and add it as a slicer. There we go. And this is one we've got a separate line for each. I would be inclined to, rather than have these repeated, if I right click here, field settings, layout, just untick that repeat item labels, and for this one as well. Then I think it's a bit clearer that there's 2 lines for that. So if I click on the others, there isn't a gap because they're all unique. And if I click here, it's a bit more obvious that there's 2 options there for that one entry. So that was your introduction to a simple merge in Power Query. I have other Power Query videos. You might want to also watch my XLOOKUP formula video as well to see how you do the same thing but using formulas.